Hey everyone, tarekith here, and today we're going to be looking at the Sequential Pro 3 Special Edition. I did my initial thoughts video on this last week, and now after a week of heavy use, thanks to the coronavirus shutdown, I am ready to share my thoughts on this one. There's a lot to cover, so I'm just going to dive right on in. Physically, it's a really well-built synth. Everything is metal, everything feels super solid. The Special Edition weighs about 35 pounds. It's not a very easily portable synth. It's got these really nice end pieces on it, made out of wood on the front and on the sides. As I pointed out in my initial thoughts video, the wood coloring on the actual unit is a lot lighter and paler than it looks online, at least from the pictures I've seen so far. Personally, I like it much better in person than I did with the pictures online, so it's not a problem, but I thought I would point that out. The keypad is really solid. I believe it's a Fatar keypad. It's definitely the best one I've used in a 37 key format. No complaints there. As I pointed out in my initial thoughts video, some of the knobs, most of the knobs actually, except for the endless encoders, are actually quite stiff and kind of difficult to turn. I shouldn't say difficult, but they're just very firm feeling. They've definitely loosened up quite a bit after using them for a while, but still they're by far like the firmest knobs I've used on a synth. So if you pick one of these up and if you're curious if that's normal for yours, yes, they all seem to be this way. I don't think it's a problem. Like I said, I'd rather the knobs were too firm and a little too tight than super loose and wobbly. They just feel like they're quality and like they're going to last a while. And as I've used it more, they've definitely loosened up some. It doesn't affect like how you use the synth at all, but I thought I would point that out because they are so different feeling compared to a lot of synths I've used. But yeah, everything is nice and solid. The Special Edition has this nice silk screen front plate. The normal Pro 3, it's like a sticker overlay with all the knob and button labels on it. It looks really nice as well. Actually, kind of like the colors better on the standard version, but the SE is silk screen. It's one thing that separates it from the normal edition. The other thing you're going to find is that you can adjust the angle of the control panel. You can put it all the way down flat. It's got some magnets to kind of hold it in place if you like it that way. And then there's two positions. There's this position and a slightly more upright one. Personally, I like this one. The hinge mechanism is really solid. The way it supports up in the back is really solid. No problems there. There's a bunch of I/O on this. You've got MIDI in, through, and two outputs. It's got 4 CV ins, 4 CV outs. I don't have any CV gear here right now, so I can't show you that functionality, but it is there. You also have an audio input, 2 stereo outputs. And then USB for USB MIDI. It does not do audio over USB. There's also a editor by Sound Tower that you can use to edit and uses a Librarian, and I've been using that as well and no problems with that. It works pretty good. So yeah, I mean, it's a really well-built synth. I believe the Special Edition was about $2,100. It definitely feels like it. There's a ton of control functionality on the panel itself. It's robust, it feels solid, it's professional, it feels like it's going to last. I wouldn't want to tour with the SE version, but if the normal standard version is just as well built as this, which it seems to be, then I would have no problems taking that touring. And I believe that's about 20 pounds lighter as well, so a little easier to carry around. So yeah, no complaints whatsoever on the actual build quality or like the physical aspect of this synth. I think Sequential did a great job. It feels way more expensive than it already is. Yeah, no complaints whatsoever. Let's dive in on the front panel, talk a little bit more about the functionality, and then I will come back and give you my overall thoughts on this synth. Okay, here we are zoomed in on the front panel a little more. Let's take a quick look at the basic architecture of this synth. You have 3 oscillators. You have 2 analog oscillators and 1 digital oscillator. The analog oscillators let you freely morph between 3 waveforms. You have triangle, sawtooth, and square. And within those is a shape mod. So like for square, it does both with modulation. In addition to the analog oscillator, like I said, you also have the digital wavetable oscillator. Like basically a super saw you can modulate. And then there's also some more wavetables in here. There we go. Altogether, you have 32 wavetables. As you can hear, even though it's a digital oscillator, like it doesn't sound super harsh and like overly bright compared to the analog oscillators. I think it actually sounds kind of analogish, even though it's digital. So you're not going to have any worries about like the two oscillator types clashing at all as you're making patches. In addition, oscillators 1 and 2 can be set to hard sync to each other for those kind of rip and hard sync lead sounds. There's also an octave control for each oscillator. Pretty basic stuff. Next up, the mixer. We have the levels for all three oscillators. Also input for the external audio. Which actually creates some cool feedback effects if you want some actually more distortion on this synth. There's also a dedicated noise source. So pretty useful stuff altogether. In addition, we have 4 envelopes, 2 dedicated to the amplitude and filter envelopes, also 2 aux envelopes with positive and negative amounts on all of those. Freely assignable in the mod matrix as well. In addition, we have 3 LFOs. Let's go ahead and just assign one to sweep through the wavetable. LFOs go quite fast as well. So we're definitely getting up in audio range there. One of the things I like the most about this synth is the mod matrix itself and how quick it is to assign things to the mod matrix. As you might have seen, I did it just a second ago. You just hold the source button down and say select LFO, and hold the destination button down, select what you want to control, and then here's the amount. This also pulls up the mod matrix screen quite quickly. Altogether, you have 32 mod slots that are freely assignable, plus 5 that are hardwired to the envelopes and the 3 LFOs. So altogether, you have roughly 37 mod slots. It's really easy to find what you're looking for. You can actually sort the sources and sort destinations based on type. So if you want to have like all your LFO destinations or sources in a list together, you can do that quite easily. Or you can sort just by the actual mod matrix number, which is the default. Very easy to use. I love the fact how quickly it is to assign things to the mod matrix. I use it all the time, way more than any other synth, just because it's so quick to do. There's also assignable things right here, like in the destination section for the LFOs themselves. So you don't even have to go up here. You can just assign the destination directly within the LFO section. Speaking of LFOs, one of the other things you can do is you can actually turn this digital oscillator into an LFO by engaging the low frequency button. So when you have like this LFO set to, say, an interesting wavetable, you can actually use like this wavetable as like a LFO modulation source. So there's a lot of flexibility there with how you route and affect things on this synth, even though it's kind of a mono synth. Next up, after the filters and envelopes, the envelopes and LFOs is going to be the filter. We have 3 analog filter types. First is a 4-pole LTA. Filter all the way up. There's also a drive control for the filters. You can overdrive it a bit. The other filter we have next, the other analog filter, is the 4-pole ladder filter. Filter resonance up all the way. Get some drive on here. One of the nice things about the analog filters, especially the low-pass ones, is there's this ladders comp in the settings menu. A lot of filters, analog filters, when you increase the resonance, the low end drops off, and they have a setting here that you can actually choose if you want that to happen or not. It keeps the low end. Let's with it off. Let's with it on. So you don't lose all your low end if you have the resonance cranked up. In addition to the 2 low-pass filters, we also have the state variable filter, the SEM filter from the OB6. It starts off in low-pass mode. sounds. It doesn't self-oscillate, just like the original SEM. And then you can sweep from low pass through notch to high pass. And it also has a dedicated bandpass mode as well. A few people have asked me, can you make the Pro 3 sound like the OB6? My answer is going to be no. The filter itself is quite similar. You get those same kind of general vibe that you would do on OB6, but the oscillators are so different sounding on the Pro 3 that, at least to me, I don't see turning the Pro 3 into like a poor man's OB6. You can do some great things with it. The state variable filter is probably one of my favorite filters out right now, and I think it sounds great on the Pro 3, but the Pro 3 doesn't really sound like the OB6 to me, despite having the same filter type. The next thing I want to cover is some of the ways you can kind of distort and mess up your sound. There's a dedicated distortion. This is in addition to the filter overdrive. It can be subtle or extreme depending on the actual sound source and your filter settings. The other thing we have in addition to that is this tune feedback, which I really like. Basically feeding back the signal on itself and you can tune that. And if that's not dirty and crazy enough for you, there's a grunge button to take it way over the top. Yeah, you can easily destroy your signal with this with this synth, which is so nice. One of the benefits too of having an audio input in the back, you can do all this to external audio if you want to. So like I said, a lot of ways to really muck up your signal if that's your thing. Moving on, we have 2 effects processors, each with 3 different parameters. There's not a ton of effects types in here. Let's see, the first effect type is just a digital stereo delay. We also have like a bucket brigade delay for a little more analog sounding. As you can hear, you can filter the repeats to make them kind of duller as they decay over time, or brighter. In addition to the filter, we also have, the delays, we also have a chorus. A flanger, phaser, and a high-pass filter. Quite nice because you can get some really crazy low end out of this synth, so the fact that you have a high-pass filter in one of the effect slots just gives you more sound shaping potential later on. And then the final effect here is a ring down. And one more effect after that is a rotating Leslie style speaker, which actually I quite like. Get some weird kind of distorted, rotating spatial effects going on that don't really sound like a Leslie. Maybe not the best example to show there, but it's capable of a lot more than you would think. So a pretty unique effect to include on this synth. Effect number 2 has the exact same effects types as effect 1 with the addition of a super plate mode, which is the only reverb on the Pro 3. I actually like this reverb quite a bit, even though it's technically a plate. You can get some really long reverbs on this. And you can change the tone up quite a bit. So yeah, that's the reverb on the Pro 3. I like that quite a bit. I wish that was on the OB6 actually. It's a lot more flexible and I think it sounds pretty good. Okay, now the last section we should talk about is the built-in sequencer. This is by far the most in-depth. I'm not going to cover every single function in this, but to kind of quickly give you an overview of it, each patch can have 4 different sequences. Each sequence can be up to 16 steps long. You don't have to use up to 16. You can use less if you want. You cannot have, you can't have separate lengths per track. They're all the tracks per sequence are they're going to be the same length. The tracks are, some of these are already pre-assigned. Track 1 is pre-assigned to your note data, basically what the note value is, which notes you're playing. Track 2 is the duration of the notes. Track 3 is ratcheting. So you can trigger multiple subdivisions per step if you want, kind of like little stutters. And track 4 is hardwired to cut off as well. The other 13 tracks are freely assignable, including to CV outputs if you want to control external gear. I believe you can also assign this transmits MIDI to MIDI as well, if that's the thing you're into. Sequences can run forward, and backwards, or random. There's also a swing for the sequencer. Divide, which sets the length. Let's just record something. To record something, you hold down the record button and play some notes. And then press play. This is forward. And reverse, do random. If you want to reset it anywhere in the play position, just press the reset button. There's a tap tempo for the sequencer. There's slew, which basically is kind of like a glide for not only the parameters that you record, but the notes themselves. So instead of fixed values, they'll slide step to step. There's a sequencer lock. This is pretty interesting. If you have the sequence lock, basically you can select another preset and it will keep the current sequence that you have playing from the previous preset still active. That's also how you copy like a sequencer data from one preset to another. You just lock the sequence, select a new preset, and then write it. Finally, the kind of other interesting thing about this is a Q program. When you hold down Q program, you can select another program to play after the current one. And what will happen is the current program and sequence will play as before, but when it reaches the end, then it switches to the next program with the new sequence. So kind of interesting for live use there. I could see a lot of potential for that. To record things to the sequencer, it's actually really, really easy. Again, pardon this really quick and nasty example, but all I do is hold down record, let's select the cutoff track, hold chord, let's get it out of random mode. And then you can see the data there. If you want to edit any of the data, it's pretty easy. Just hold down a step and then there's a value knob here you can turn, so you can fine-tune your parameters as much as you want. In addition, there's some other functionality for the sequencer. You can copy tracks among sequences. You can erase tracks. One of the interesting things is you can actually mute the notes from the track. So say you recorded, I've got that cutoff going, but I don't want to actually play the sequence, just play back the cutoff moves. I can turn off notes for that track. So now it's just playing the notes I hold down instead of what was recorded, but it's actually playing back the recorded cutoff values that I have. So there's a lot of different flexibility there with the sequencer. Like I said before, I think this actually could be its own dedicated product. It's so deep. I've kind of only really quickly touched on what's possible. The last thing I want to talk about, though, is the paraphonic mode. So in addition to being a monosynth, you can actually play 3 voices at once with paraphonic mode. One of the neat things about this is it's round robin assignment. So basically every time you play a new note, it will pick the next free oscillator. So you can set the oscillators to be different, say, octaves like I have here. So it actually sounds like there's a lot more going on than just 3 different notes. This is really great when you have the sequencer going, because you can make some really complex sounding sequences that sound like they're way more than just 3-note paraphonic. Where's an example of one I've got here. This is one I recorded that uses that quite a bit. You can see here all the oscillators are set to different octaves. The other interesting thing about this, I have the sequence playing just randomly. So I recorded everything kind of harmonically, it's all in the same scale, but now it's just randomly picking from the different sequences I recorded, which is kind of cool. So there you go. There is the sequencer on the Pro 3. By far one of my favorite things about this unit, the fact it's so well ingrained with all the different synthesis parameters. You can actually sequence effects parameters too, and effects parameters are available in the mod matrix, which is great. Not a lot of synths have that, so really happy to see that on the Pro 3. So that's a quick overview of everything. Let's take a step back and I will give you my final thoughts on this one. Okay, so that was a really quick and dirty overview of all the different parameters in the synth. I'm going to go into more depth in these in future videos, hopefully. So if I seem like I rushed through some of that, don't worry, more is coming. I just wanted to do like a quick overview of what the synth comes with. Physically speaking, I really enjoy this synth. It's built really well. It feels solid. It looks really nice. The key bed feels great. The wheels feel great. This little touch strip here is super responsive. Probably the most responsive touch strip I've used on any kind of synth, or even say it's better than Push 2, I think. It's got a nice crisp OLED display. It'll turn off if you're not using it after a while, so you don't burn it out. The only complaint I kind of have is these buttons, these red sequencer buttons, and some of the other red buttons can be kind of bright in a dark studio. I wish there was a way to turn those down a little bit. But that's really my only complaint from like the hardware side of things. It feels really good. The knobs are a little stiff, but overall they feel like quality, and it's a lot of fun to use. It's really easy to find what you're looking for on this synth. There's not a lot of menu diving. The stuff that's in the menus makes sense to be there, and it's really easy to find. So it's a really, really easy synth to use, even though there's a lot of flexibility here. The one part I kind of was a little hesitant on was the sound of the synth. Not the actual sound quality of it, but just the tone. It's natural, just naturally the kind of sounds it gravitates towards. I hate to use the words dull, or muted, but it's got kind of like a warmer sound to it. Even though you have this digital wavetable oscillator, it's not going to get really super bright or buzzy. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just got this nice gooey analog vibe to it that most people probably want when they buy an analog synth. So it just took me a little while to kind of find the sweet spot for that. And coming from, for me, at least me coming from the OV6, just had this really beautiful high end on it. Like, it took me a while to kind of find that similar sort of vibe on the Pro 3. It's definitely there. You just have to dig for a little more. Where this synth just blows everything else out of the water, as far as I'm concerned, is those really just distorted and heavy, leads and bass lines, things like that. EDM producers are going to have a blast with this. The fact that you get these really ripping bass lines that are so popular these days. And there's just so many different ways to add interesting distortion and keep it still playable. I don't want to oversell it as like this only does distorted sounds. It just does those really, really well. You can coax some quite beautiful sounds out of this too. Just keep an eye on the levels in your mixer, and leave the tune feedback a little more subtle, things like that. But for me at least, like this whole dark and distorted thing, I love about this synth. It does really, really amazing sounds that way, and just takes you in places you never expect to go. Especially once you start bringing the sequencer into things. The fact that the sequencer is so integral into the synthesis portion of the synthesizer, you don't really see too much of that these days outside of some of the Electron gear, where the sequencer is just so critical to what you can do with it. So yeah, the fact that Sequential did that and had this awesome mod matrix routing and assignment functionality that really speeds up like all the different modulations you can use. It's so easy to use like all 3 LFOs and all 4 envelopes and all 16 steps on the sequencer without realizing it, and you come up with these really evolving complex sequences. So for that, I like it a lot. Like I said, it took me a while to kind of find the sweet spot for me, like what kind of sounds I was going to enjoy using this for, but now that I have, like, I can't imagine not owning this. As far as like the special edition versus the normal edition, I think if you're gigging, it's a no-brainer. Go for the regular edition. I think it's like 20 pounds lighter than the 35-pound beast this is. So it's easier to carry around. If it's only going to be in your studio, I have to say I really like the angled front panel. It's just a little more comfortable to tweak and use. Overhead lights don't bother it as much, things like that. There's no glare. It's just a more ergonomically fun way to interact with this synth. So for me, I would recommend the special edition version if you have the space for it and the extra cash. And it does look a little nicer overall, I think, too, even with these wood pieces being slightly different color than what was pictured online. So yeah, two thumbs up for me. The Pro 3 is an amazing synth. It's just a sequence powerhouse. The fact you can actually disconnect sequences from the notes themselves, you can use these crazy modulations and still play freely on the keyboard like you would anything else. The round robin paraphonic mode is really cool. Again, you'll keep hearing me say this, tied with the sequencer, you can really do some evolving and unexpected things you wouldn't expect out of a mono synth with the kind of a really basic paraphonic mode. So yeah, really good job, Sequential. I think this is a really cool synth. I can see why so many places are having problems stocking these things right now. Outside of the whole coronavirus thing, just this is a really in-demand synth for good reason. For the price, you get a ton of options. It sounds really good, and it does things that I think, frankly, not many other synths really do. It's got kind of its own unique sound to it, and that's a good thing. That's it for me. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Otherwise, I will be back soon, hopefully with some more Pro 3 videos and some more sound examples, kind of showing you what we can do with this thing. I want to dive into that some more in separate videos later on. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you next time.